It is July 21st, 2018, anniversary of the first Bull Run battle, the first significant battle of the Civil War, the largest battle fought in North America up to that time. Today, if you were standing in this spot at this time, this day, in 1861, you'd be about in the middle of the Union line. The Union Army woke up, most of them got up about 2:30 in the morning and started marching south, crossing Bull Run, which is ahead of us here to the left, and forming line of battle. Where we're looking now would have been the 1st Rhode Island and the 2nd Rhode Island. The 1st Rhode Island was commanded by Joseph Balch, who was a cousin. A little bit ahead of us here would have been the 71st New York. And then about where I'm standing, with its right anchored on that road, the Manassas Sudley, would have been the 2nd New Hampshire. I had two family in the 2nd New Hampshire, William Calkins and Edward Plummer. Edward Plummer would eventually be killed in a few years at Gettysburg and be buried there. Confederate line, just ahead of us there in that small rise. This battle would go for about 2 hours. And then eventually further to our left, the 1st Minnesota would have joined the battle. I had two more cousins, Charles Loomis and Melvin Fuller. Charles Loomis would also be killed at Gettysburg and then be buried in Massachusetts. But for the next 2 hours, they would slug it out here on Matthews Hill. And then eventually the Union line would slowly overwhelm the Confederates. And the Confederates would fall back to Henry Hill, which you can see in the background. That building on the left there is the reconstructed Henry House. The Henry House was there during the battle. In fact, it was destroyed during the battle. That white building to the right is the current visitor center. And what you can't see is between us and them is a little valley with what was then called the Warrenton Turnpike, what is now Lee Highway. Now as the Union Army is pushing the Confederates off of Matthews Hill and back towards Henry Hill, a little bit of disorganization starts to happen. Again, being the first real big battle, this was a steep learning curve for soldier and general alike. In fact, units in both sides had gray and blue uniforms. The 2nd Wisconsin, this would be their first battle, would fight the battle in gray uniforms and be shot at by both Confederates and Union troops. I think the most significant issue was the fact that the Union command, instead of attacking en masse, would charge up Henry Hill 1 or 2 regiments at a time. And that tree line that's behind the Henry House Hill and the Visitor Center were Jackson's troops. And that's where he would earn his name, Stonewall. And that is where we're headed next. Out ahead of us there is Matthews Hill. We'd be looking at the Union line right now. And then following this way would have been the Union Army. And down in front of us is the Warrenton Turnpike and the Stone House, which was there during the battle and used as a hospital. And then Henry Hill, the reconstructed Henry House, is right there. Now between noon and 1, the Union Army, piecemeal, would cross the Warrenton Turnpike and begin their assault. First over would be the 3rd Connecticut, the 2nd Maine over there. And then shortly thereafter, right where I'm standing, the 1st Minnesota would come down this hill, around the Stone House, and begin to go up Henry Hill. And one by one, these attacks would go up the hill and fail. Later in the day, Manassas Sudley Road, which is just here, Sherman's troops in the 2nd Wisconsin would march down. And instead of attempting to go straight up the hill, they would go down the road that's there in view and then cross to the left. But again, because all the attacks were piecemeal, the attacks would fail. Right now, about 1:30 in the afternoon on July 21st, 1861, the 1st Minnesota came marching towards the Camaro on the Manassas Sudley Road. Back that way is Matthews Hill, and just to our right here is the reconstructed Henry House. In an effort to outflank the Confederates, instead of attacking straight up Henry Hill, they marched up the Manassas Sudley Road and turned here and came marching straight up this way. And you can see here, you can't even see the Confederate line. So my two cousins, Melvin Fuller and Charles Loomis, marched here. Melvin Lewis, in a letter home after the battle, talked about how tomorrow, on July 22nd, it was his 21st birthday, and he found himself humping it back towards Washington City, in his words. Melvin would fight in all the major battles of the 1st Minnesota, including Gettysburg, and not be wounded a sicker a day. Charles Loomis, unfortunately, would be killed at Gettysburg. Now, as you see coming over the hill, you start to see the plain out ahead of us. Now, their attack, much like the previous ones in the day, they made pretty much alone. And being outnumbered, after their attack, they were forced to retreat the same way they came up. To our left, approximate the position of Ricketts Battery, who they were sent to try and protect, but they were just too close to the enemy. There, just to the right of that tree, is the roof of the stone house. And to the left, you can see the Manassas Sudley Road headed back up towards Matthews Hill. And then the Henry House. And then right in front is the large Stonewall Jackson statue, the visitor center, and the hill back from where we came. In about a half an hour, the 2nd Wisconsin would attempt to charge up the hill as well. But we'll talk about that in a half an hour. So here we are again. It is now about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, July 21st. If you were standing here at this spot, at this time, on this day, you'd see the 2nd Wisconsin and the rest of Sherman's division marching up the Manassas Sudley Road. They basically took the same path that the 1st Minnesota had traveled, except for the 2nd Wisconsin turned in just a little bit earlier. Where we were in the last video was several hundred yards in that direction. So I'm sure that as the 2nd Wisconsin was marching, they could hear the firefight that would have been off to their right. The 2nd Wisconsin would begin their attack up the hill from right about here. And it's interesting to me, when you're out here at the battlefields and seeing what they saw, you can clearly see that as they're marching to the hill, they have no idea what's on the other side. And you're going to see that with me, again, same time, same day. Now, one of the bigger differences is today it's pouring rain, and on that day it was mid-90s, very hot. The 2nd Wisconsin line would actually extend off to our left, and a couple of companies would go to the left of the Henry House up there. And again, just for perspective, looking to our left, out over there is Matthews Hill, and right there in center screen is the roof of the stone house. The 2nd Wisconsin had another cousin of mine, Waldo Stearns. He'd enlisted in the 2nd Wisconsin, and he wrote a letter to another cousin of his who was in the 2nd Wisconsin. But because he was on his mother's side, he's not related to me. But his cousin had been captured here at Bull Run. And in writing his letter, he talked about how they had to make the attack in gray uniforms. In fact, many regiments here of the Union wore the gray state militia uniforms, and the 2nd Wisconsin was one of them. In the letter he wrote, he talked about the day that they got the blue uniforms. Now again, off to our right here would have been the 1st Minnesota. Now when their attack failed, they were pushed further to the right, to the other side of the Manassas-Sudley Road. Waldo would serve with the 2nd Wisconsin until the Battle of Antietam, where he was shot in the hand, and that would effectively end the war for him. Now, as we kind of go into a depression here, you'd think you'd see more and more as you come up the hill, but you actually don't. The 2nd Wisconsin's attack would take roughly an hour from when they formed up on the road until they would have to fall back eventually. Again, they were another victim of piecemeal attacks that had been occurring for the Union Army all day. And here we are, almost to the top of the hill, and you still can't really see anything. You have really no idea that thousands of Confederates were essentially lying in wait. Alright, we'll take a second just to turn. Now you can see back up to Matthews Hill, Manassas-Sudley Road, looking down the hill to where we just came up, and then moving in a circle again where the 1st Minnesota attacked. And here we are almost to the top of the hill, and you still probably wouldn't be able to see the thousands of Confederates that were here. The regiment was long enough that several companies would pass to the left of the Henry House, and the rest would pass here to the right. So now, you can see all the way to the Confederate artillery, which was just in front of that tree line, that far tree line. But they would move up here, and they would get to the other side of this hill to begin their attack. They would fall in line, and then attack, and stay basically as long as they could. Now, turn around here. Now again, the problem is you can already start to see that the rest of the Union Army at the bottom of the hill would lose sight of the 2nd Wisconsin. So during the attack, when the 2nd Wisconsin would eventually be pushed back, they would retreat pretty much back the same way. But now the difference is, the Union Army, what they saw was a bunch of men in gray uniforms running down the hill. So they suffered from friendly fire as well as Confederate fire. Now they would be forced back to the bottom of the hill, back by the road, and then retreat with the army at the end of the day. We're now on Chin Ridge, a little after 3 p.m. Now between 3 and 5, Howard's division crossed the Warrenton Turnpike and attempted to swing back towards Henry Hill, which is in front of us. Warrenton Turnpike would have been back that way. If you come this way, you basically park in the Chin Ridge parking, and to the right is a trail. And the trail is nice, it's a concreted path. And right now we're standing between the 2nd Vermont and the 3rd Main. The 2nd Vermont would have been right over here. They would have been in a line with the 3rd Main stretching down this road, with the 4th Main and then the 5th Main in line. And the line would have ended just around that curve over there. Now in the 2nd Vermont, I had 3 family, Osmond, Elverton, and Alden Loomis. All 3 would be wounded in the war, one at Savage Station, one at South Mountain, one at Antietam. In the 3rd Main, I had Frank Boynton, Wilbert Boynton, and Daniel Moody. Moody would be wounded at Gettysburg. And Frank Boynton, who would have been in line right here with the 3rd Main, would have been the only family member that was wounded here at First Bull Run. He would be captured, but I'm guessing because of his wounds, he was paroled pretty much immediately. Now further in line was the 4th Main. I had Sewell Seavey, William Seavey, and Bradford Lowell. All 3 of them would have a interesting war. One was wounded at Fredericksburg, one was wounded at Gettysburg, and Bradford Lowell would be captured at Gettysburg and would die at Anderson Prison Camp in Georgia. So again, this is our last stop for the day, our last video. Again, they were in line here looking this way, and Henry Hill is off over that way. So were the Confederate troops, and unfortunately for them, Confederate reinforcements came through the town of Manassas and would outflank the line looking down this way. So once they'd been outflanked, they had to retreat back to our left, back this way, back across the Warrenton Turnpike, and would retreat with the rest of the army back to Washington City.